My research project was on the Brian Williams story, a story that involved three sins of memory of distortion and inaccuracy, misattribution, suggestibility, and bias, and how they played into the creation of false memories. At the heart of this presentation is Brian Williams' story of the Iraq War incident, which, after the fact, he summarized in a simple statement. I made a mistake in recalling the event of 12 years ago. Brian Williams was the NBC Nightly News anchor and managing editor for 10 years. Prior to his becoming anchor, he did a report from the northern Iraqi desert, in where he was in part of a group of 4 helicopters flying over the desert. He was in fact in the last of the 4 helicopters. They experienced light arms fire and an RPG attack. Well, it's important to note that that RPG attack was instead on the helicopter in front of Williams's. Williams' helicopter only experienced light arms fire, and in fact, there was about a 30-minute difference in between that front helicopter, or the helicopter in front of Williams and his. Williams did not, in fact, see this event firsthand. However, over time, his story developed from telling it accurately, the helicopter in front of his was shot down by RPG fire, to his helicopter. And that change caused an eruption and a controversy, eventually leading to a 6-month suspension, where NBC News conducted several internal investigations, and then afterward, the decision to demote him from NBC Nightly News anchor, the most watched anchor position, to reporting on MSNBC. This is a statement that he said on David Letterman.
2 of our 4 helicopters were hit by ground fire, including the one I was in.
No kidding.
RPG and AK-47.
What altitude were you hit at?
We were only at 100 feet doing 100 forward knots.
As you see there, Williams told the story on The Late Show with David Letterman. Now, he also said the story on a CNBC show, he said it on a podcast of Alec Baldwin, and when he spoke at several universities, he repeated the same story in front of student reporters. And there was an important distinction. Williams also blogged about some of these events as well. When blogging about them, he stuck pretty much to the facts, only until the very end. But also, when he spoke in front of an audience, the story was slightly different. Anyway, we will now move from the Williams story and sort of look to how memories in general see alteration over time. So, the central guiding question was Brian Williams a victim of a sin of memory, or did he deliberately alter the story for his own benefit? Now, there is no real answer to this question. We don't know unless we were in Williams's head. However, what we can observe is see how over a progression of time, memories change, and how over time they are susceptible to different kinds of change. But first, I think it's important to revisit the last stage of the Atkinson-Shiffrin model, memory model, that of long-term memory. Long-term memory is divided into declarative and implicit memory. Implicit doesn't really apply here too much, but implicit is sort of procedural tasks of I know how to run, I know how to write, I know how to swim. Declarative memory, on the other hand, is subdivided into 3 categories. Episodic, which involves stories, essentially, individual episodes. Semantic memory involves facts, dates, times, different things like that. And then autobiographical wraps both episodic and semantic into sort of one narrative, and then combines multiple of those little narratives to provide sort of the broader life story, an autobiographical sense of where in time the story took place. Now, this directly applies to Williams's case in that it allows us to explore the progression of this broader narrative over time with specific alterations to facts, the semantic side of it, as to which helicopter was hit and if it was a first-hand account or not. And another easy way of remembering this quick long-term memory recall is episodic memory. All the times you spent with your cat, like a specific moment, they ate out of the litter box, who knows. Semantic memory, facts about your cat. It was 7 years old when you got it. It had dark gray hair. And then autobiographical memory, it's basically the progression of facts or the collection of facts of times with your cat that developed into sort of this creation or feeling. Now, in long-term memory, memories are susceptible to alteration. They're also susceptible to forgetting. So one of the distinctions in the 7 sins of memory are types of forgetting. Now these include transience, absent-mindedness, and blocking. Now these three, it's important to note that they do not apply directly to Williams's case. These involve more an inability to remember specific events or specific details of events. Transience is just forgetting over time, just a lack of recall over time will prevent that recall from occurring in the first place. Absent-mindedness, and actually it's important to note with transience, it won't go away completely, it just requires a bigger priming to receive that memory. Absent-mindedness, just forgetting where your keys were, just you're not paying attention to that direct period of time. And blocking, sort of the tip of the tongue, the recall pathway is not strong enough yet. Now there's a separate type. This is not a forgetting type, but this is a distortion or an accuracy part. These are some of the most dangerous ways that memories can go from the truth to not the truth. Now, several scientists have pointed out over time that memory is in fact not a recorded soundbite or video recording, let's say, of truth. No, it is influenced by past events that, by your current mood or your current belief, can affect the way that you recall a story or recall the different events or add significance to some events while taking away some significance to other events. Now, of these 3 sins, there is misattribution, so the forgetting what source a particular event or detail came from. There is bias, which plays perhaps the most critical role in William's story, and then there is suggestibility, whereas through priming questions, we see a change in a narrative. And then there's one sin of memory that falls into its own category, and that is types of intrusion. And that is sort of the opposite of sins of forgetting. It's actually sins that you cannot forget, most often seen through PTSD. Now, we just wanted to spend a little bit of time with 3 of those sins of distortion or inaccuracy. So misattribution, again, is the attributing different sources to actions. Now, in all of these incidents, we won't go through each one, but it is seen that a person will attribute the cause of a fact or attribute the way they gained the knowledge to something other than it was. And now that actually affects their ability to tell the story in the first place, as slight alterations to maybe who had told them led to a different narrative outcome. With the John Doe incident in the Oklahoma bombing, investigators asked several people where different information came from. A person kept on thinking that it was different people, and in fact, this actually plays into some suggestibility as well. Now we also see there's one test in the Reese Donginger trial that when we saw a change in age and their ability to attribute facts to their root source. younger people were able to sort of their probability of accurate recall was much higher than those of old people, and it's interesting to see here that perhaps there's some neurological side to misattribution and the ability to sort of connect a source to a cause to a source. Now, suggestibility, there are actually many experiments that we can see in suggestibility. Essentially, it's the way questions are asked can lead to the way the retelling is portrayed. So incorporation of misinformation into memory due to leading questions, deception, or other causes. We can see these in interrogations where one person will keep on pushing a point or asking a question further, which will cause the reteller to begin to distort their memory and think, oh wait, you're asking this question in this way, you're suggesting this person of guilt, different things like that, and then eventually that plays into the actual narrative that they're developing, that they're working. These experiments show how when you're told by somebody who you appear to be credible, your your perceived sense of what your own reality is actually decreases when you're told by, let's say, a toddler or somebody young or somebody with low credibility. In this case, low credibility is seen in a 4-year-old retelling a story, and then being asked questions about it. The people had less of a chance of believing it, and then in the high credibility, it was a distinguished psychologist. There was also a change observed in the amount of time waited. So I think the first one was about 10 minutes. The latter was I think close to 4 weeks of time. So what they would do is they would show in some of these experiments, they'd show a list of questions, and then you'd wait a little bit, and then they'd show you a longer list of questions, which included the previous list of questions, but all of them would sort of be related. So there'd be sleep, for example, like in the category sleep, there would be bed, there would be pillow, there would be dreams, and then in the broader category, they would add ones like insomnia or blanket or different things like that, things that related that would sort of suggest their presence in the previous list of words. Now we move on to bias. Now bias is divided into egocentric and consistency. Now consistency, again, does not play so much of a role in Williams' story. Consistency bias is incorrectly remembering one's past attitudes and behaviors as resembling present attitudes and behaviors. This can often be seen through politicians, as they try and switch, more often than not intentionally, trying to switch what their past actions were. So maybe trying to add less significance to maybe voting on a certain thing or saying a certain thing so that it appears more in line with a pretty concrete and not flip-flopping message at the end. Egocentric bias plays a very critical and paramount role in Williams' story, where over time one can begin to place more emphasis on their own involvement in a story than had actually really occurred. Now Williams switched from distinguishing that the helicopter incident was not a first-hand account to switching that it was a first-hand account. And then basically that played out through multiple retellings, and then there was another critical shift where he began to switch from it was the helicopter ahead of us to all of our helicopters were hit to it was the helicopter I was in. And in that final broadcast, when he was honoring the death of Command Sergeant Tim Turpak, that is when people began to ask questions, and when people that were there in the actual incident said, no, you were not there during the helicopter incident, and in fact, you were actually trying to use that story to move yourself forward. Now, there are actually many psychological explanations for some of these. And we won't touch into all of them, but we can see with at least some of the frontal lobe and medial temporal lobe damages, they affect certain ways in which some memories are recalled, certain details are left out, certain moods and emotions are left out as well. Inadequate encoding and defective retrieval, they're actually, depending on the way you acquired a source, whether that be through your own retelling or through somebody else's retelling, that can affect the different ways that you encode. Also, the moods that you were feeling or the current beliefs that you had while you were perceiving the information. This information is actually coming in as you are taking two-dimensional information, and then in your head you're actually creating pretty vivid three-dimensional features, some that didn't in fact even exist. But basically, your moods and your beliefs do affect the way that you actually see things. They affect your sensory register. And then defective retrieval, that is actually that is affected through misattribution and suggestibility and bias, where the information that was once stored, that there's something impeding its way from being retold accurately. We see the same case in amnesia and Alzheimer's patients. Also, the multiple times you retell a story, you're creating an ever complex schema of what your understanding of that story is, and then each individual retelling plays into how the following retelling will be told. So if Williams in one retelling began to tell that we were hit by multiple by rounds of AK-47 and RPG, that could play into how he said the future one of I was in the helicopter hit by the RPG. And then there's a very interesting one. There's actually very little research in this, but it seems very likely into why egocentric bias takes place, and that's the dopamine reward effect. Dopamine is a neurotransmitter that is sort of heavily regarded to be part of this reward motivated actions. So maybe, or perhaps in Williams' retelling of stories, he gains a heightened sense of pride. And in fact, in an interview with the Today Show's Matt Lauer, actually right after his 6-month suspension, he was sort of required to do an interview to get his new job. He said that it came from a deep, dark place in me, an ego-driven place in me, that wanted to increase my role in a story I was already a part of. Now, this sense of, I mean, it's apparent that dopamine is playing into his ability to retell the story, in that when he was with audiences, when he was on the David Letterman show, his stories were more vague and oftentimes appeared to be further from the truth. Maybe the laughter that people had, maybe the awe that people had, or that people bestowed upon him, created this heightened sense of, oh, maybe I'll just exaggerate one detail. Now, it's important to note that there is both a subconscious and a conscious action here. Perhaps some of this egocentric bias happens subconsciously, but if were to happen consciously, then Williams would be directly guilty of embellishing. And that's sort of this critical question at hand, was whether egocentric bias is directly subconscious in its sort of seeking for dopamine, for that dopamine reward of sort of filling you with pride, and then every time you feel a need to exaggerate one more detail, or if it was a conscious decision. Now, not all of us are going to experience a fall from our height because of mistelling a story. In fact, William's story is quite unique, but it is perhaps the highest profile story to involve this. And he went from the beloved and trusted anchor, most watched anchor in the U.S., to he completely fell. He personally said he hit rock bottom. Not all of us are going to experience that, but just some. Probably all of us have experienced it. Not the consequences of it, but at least have experienced maybe exaggerating a couple details of a story so that more people are interested, maybe you get a bigger laugh, and then that actually plays into your future retellings of the story. Now, maybe at Lawrenceville, this could have the application of disciplinary hearings and how people ask you different questions to maybe make you think you had witnessed something, or maybe make you accuse somebody of doing something that they actually had in fact not done. Again, with these exaggerations, maybe they develop false memories and false narratives. Some possible solutions include, and actually there's an added one to this, but keeping records. Right after a critical event happens, you write down some of the key facts in a journal or something. This will sort of give you sort of more concrete evidence. Limiting exaggerations. Now, there is some benefit to exaggerations. Maybe we do get a heightened sense of pride, maybe a bigger laugh, but over time, these exaggerations can only grow worse, and they only impede our ability to tell the real truth. And oftentimes, one exaggeration can start off with, maybe I jumped 10 feet to I jumped 30. Over time, they can just grow wildly out of proportion. And then there's actually a last one, and that is maybe admitting to having forgotten something, not feeling a need to fill in the details, because oftentimes when we do fill in the details, we fill them in with what we think happened, not what we know happened. All right, so that is Brian Williams' story as told through misattribution, suggestibility, and bias.